My name is Marcia Cuccaro. Today is Thursday, November 9th, 2017. I'm with the Nevada Women's History Project. Today, through the generosity of the John Ben Snow Grant, I'm going to be interviewing Florence Suenaga, who is a longtime Carson City resident and a former detainee of the World War II Japanese Internment Camp in Poston, Arizona. Florence and I have a history starting when I think I was like 17 maybe, and I went to work for what was the very first developing personnel department for the state, and you worked there.
Yes.
And I had not seen you since I left that summer until very recently when I learned you were still living in Carson City. Could I ask you to state your birth name and your date and place of birth?
My birth name was Kozuye Nakashiki, born in Garlic Country, Gilroy, California,
In
1928.
And we're going to talk about your time when you were in the internment camp in Arizona, but when did you come to Nevada and when did you come to Carson City?
Yes, we came to Nevada in 1950 to Minden, and then we moved to Carson City in 1956, end of November.
And you've been in Carson City ever since.
Yes.
So going back to your early years, can you describe where you spent the first part of your life?
Well, my father had a farm. He was a farmer. So we spent all of my life in Gilroy, California. I did not move anywhere else. We moved from farm to farm until we purchased some land. And then when the war broke out, that was the first time I left Gilroy, California.
So did you grow garlic? Is that what?
Yes.
Because isn't Gilroy known for garlic?
Yes. Gilroy was known as the garlic capital of the world, and but eventually they didn't grow any more garlic. But it's still known as the garlic.
So when you were living at home with your family, can you describe your family and important people during your childhood?
Well, we had a farm, and so of course my parents got up really early and worked till dusk, just about.
Did you have siblings?
Yes, I had two brothers and a sister who were older than I was. And my brother George was the first person to be selected by the draft, and so he was in the army before the war started. And so my older brother, ran the ranch, and my mother and father worked out.
At one point, you told me that you really didn't feel the effects of the war until one night somebody shot at your house. Is that?
Yes, I can remember December 7th very well. We found out at noon, at lunchtime, my brother had gone to the grocery store and he came back with the news. In those days, we did not have a telephone and we did not have TV and we only had one great big Zenith radio. So communication was usually done verbally. Somebody came to your house or you went to somebody else's house. So that was the way we lived. And it was just an ordinary farm. My brother and father raised garlic and mostly strawberries.
I remember you telling me that you became really acutely aware of the war or something when somebody shot at your house.
Somebody shot a house in the area, but it wasn't anybody that I knew or my family knew. And a young girl was shot in the leg. So what we did was, my sister and I we had to share our bedroom, and we put the mattresses against the windows so that if anybody shot, it wouldn't come through.
Oh my goodness. So, when you were before the war, Were you living in a home where you had Japanese traditions that you followed?
Yes, we had traditions like we were Buddhist, and therefore we did not celebrate Christmas. But the New Year's was the big celebration. And that was when my mother would cook beautiful dishes, and the men would come and wish you a Happy New Year. And you never saw a woman come. It was always the man that came. And it lasted until the 7th of January. And then New Year's celebration was over. Also, on New Year's, for Christmas, we did not receive any gifts. But at New Year's, my father would give us money. And the older you were, of course, you got more. And being the youngest, I got the least.
So did those traditions carry over from your home in Gilroy to when you were relocated?
No.
No.
Everything changed.
Flo, can you kind of describe your life and the life of your family and how it changed when World War II started?
Well, one of the things that really changed was the fact that we always had our meals together. But when the war started, our internment first camp was Salinas, the rodeo grounds in Salinas, California. We were given orders to what we could bring, and one of the things that we had to bring was tin dishes and things like that. I remember mine as being an enameled white plate and a tin cup and utensils. So when we went there, you were called to a mess hall that was run by the military. So the camps were situated just like in the military. So when you went to eat at that time in Salinas, California, the Army was your cook. And you took your cup and your plate and you got your food dished out to you. So I do not recall ever having to sit down and having a family. I was sitting with other people. So when you marched in to the mess hall, you marched in and you sat down, and there was 8 people to a table. So if you were going in there with your mother, but there was only one seat left at that one table, then she sat there or I sat there, or my sister. The only time that a family was together was when we were in the permanent internment camp, where only on Thanksgiving and at Christmas I got to sit with my.
When you were in Salinas, where did you stay?
We stayed in barracks. It was just like a military.
Oh.
Just like the Army.
You didn't stay in horse stalls?
No.
Like some people
my
did.
My husband's family did. And they went to Tanforan.
Oh.
Racetrack.
The racetrack.
Yeah, but we had, there was 4 rooms to a barrack, and so your whole family moved in. For some reason, there was a huge roll of sheeting that somehow or other we divided that into rooms. Everything was Army. In Salinas, we had cots, and we had wool blankets. That was everything was military. The food was military.
So how long did you live in Salinas?
We went there, I recall we went there around April, and somewhere in the summer, in the heat of summer, probably about July, we were transported by train with the military MPs with us, and we went to Poston, Arizona.
And how old were you then?
I was 13 when the war started, but I want to go back to Salinas because when we left school, it was just before school was ending. So our teachers came to the camp and to give us our diplomas. We had a graduation in camp, and I thought that was quite nice of them to do that.
Yeah, for sure.
So when we arrived in Salinas, we had orders from the military that we could only bring certain things. And so when you got off the bus, you opened your suitcase, and then the military would go through your things to make sure you brought no scissors and things that, you could hurt yourself.
Or somebody else.
Or somebody else. And I can't recall how we were taken to the barracks, but we went there. We had military towers with the soldiers up on the tower with their, I guess, machine guns. And but nobody ever left there or tried to escape. And it was, since we were military, we had what they call latrines, and we did not have toilets that were flush. They were those old-fashioned, and whoever made the holes for the toilets must have been a pretty big guy because they were big. and showers were probably built, they were up on the ceiling, and so I was rather tall for a Japanese. So when I went to take a shower, I had to turn everybody else's shower on until somebody made a stool, because you had to reach up. But it was very confusing at that time because you had to find where your military mess halls were. And my sister used to talk in her sleep and say, weenies again. So that was, we had Army food, just like the Army.
So you said you moved to Poston in the summer. How different was that?
It was, the barracks looked the same, and there was 4 rooms to a barrack, and it was one huge room for the family. And there again was those sheets. And my brother had just recently got married, so that was not very...
Right. No privacy.
No privacy. But when we got to Poston, we landed in Parker from the trains. We were transported in these huge Army trucks, I guess you'd call them. They were covered with canvas. And we got deposited to our barrack, and we were in block 32. I imagine there was just 32 blocks. There was about 17 or 18 barracks that you lived in, plus what they call a recreation hall and a mess hall, just like the Army. And in the middle of the block, there was the latrine and the washroom. That was in the center of your block.
And they had a school in Poston too, correct?
At the very beginning, we didn't have any school, and I recall that as a freshman, I had to walk quite a ways to go to one block that they took over the recreation room, and we had classes. Then slowly, the people started to build the school with adobe, which was located several miles away from where I was, but I guess it wasn't that far. And so the school that I went to looked like that. It was built by the adobe.
Just a flat roofed.
Yes, I think a lot of schools you find that kind of buildings. This was the picture of what we call the gym hall was built, and there's the barracks. Not the barracks, they were the art school that we went, which was located from where I lived to the other end of the camp.
So you got your exercise.
Yes, and very hot.
And very hot. So in this book, is there a picture of you?
There's a picture of me in a class that my teacher was Mrs. Lillian Taylor, And she came from Alabama.
Oh my goodness.
And she had a very strong Southern accent. And my mother went to take classes from her because my mother wanted to write letters to my brother in Europe during the war.
And this is you.
Yes.
And okay, so you were 13 or 14 when you went there.
I was 14 when or 15 when I was that.
So you were a sophomore, and when you did you finish high school there?
No, the war ended, and we came back home to Gilroy, and I finished my schooling in Gilroy High School. I graduated.
So when you were in the internment camp, what stays with you? What kind of memories do you have?
Well, the first one was when we got dumped off the military thing. In front of the barrack was a pile of hay and cots that were made out of, the kind that were canvas.
The bend?
That you had to put together.
Oh.
So the idea was that you were supposed to fill these mattress covers with the straw, and you built your little cot, and then you just set it up because there was no other furniture or anything, just your cot. And it was too hot to be sleeping on top of a mattress with hay, so we just slept just directly on there, and of course we had military blankets, but we certainly didn't need any.
Do you remember your parents, what kind of adjustment they had to make?
Yes, they adjusted, it was adjustment because they used to get up at 4 o'clock and get ready to go to the fields. So what it was, to me, it was a vacation.
A vacation.
A vacation from going out to the field to work. So in the posting camp, we had, I think he was a military cook at one time, because when he called us for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, he had a bugle that I guess maybe they had in the army there. So when we heard the bugle, we didn't have any more tin cups or tin plates, and we just went in there and walked in there just like the army guys. And that's when, we didn't really eat as a family.
So what did your parents do? Did they work, or did they?
My father, for some reason, got a job as a garbage truck driver. He got $19 a month for that, and then he had 2 employees that rode in the back of the truck that picked up the garbage. So he was home, usually by lunchtime. But he was diabetic, and so he had to go eat with the babies and other diabetic people. So I never did have dinner or anything with my father until it was holiday.
And then you were able to have a family dinner?
Yes, just at Thanksgiving and at Christmas.
And what did your mom do during all this time?
Well, my mother, they had little craft classes, and then she went to Mrs. Taylor's class to learn how to read and to write, because my brother was in the 442nd Battalion group and he was in Europe, so she wanted to write him letters. So she went to school at night, and Mrs. Taylor had a very strong Southern accent, and where she would say can't, she would say can't. And she told my mother in her class that was not correct, that you had to say can't. But my mother had those books, like See Spot Run or C.J. Dinner. And so she had a pretty interesting, I think both of them did. My dad would go and play a Japanese game called Go, which is really checkers.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had it We had just a routine. It was just routine. You wait for the bugle to sound and you went to eat. And
So you mentioned your mother went to classes to learn how to read and write. So were your parents born in Japan?
yes, they were born in Hiroshima.
Oh, and then they came here.
My father came to America when he was about 19, I guess, and they were farmers. My grandfather was here too, and then my mother came to San Francisco to get married.
So your mom learned to read and write in the camps?
Mm-hmm. And you would see the books she would bring about Spot and Jane and Dick.
You said your mom learned to read and write because your brother, I remember you telling me, was in the service.
Mm-hmm.
And he was in the service before the war, right?
Yes. When the selective service law was established, I don't remember what year that was, but he was one of the first draftees from our town to go.
So he was serving in the war while you were in the camps?
Yes.
Oh, that was kind of a dichotomy, I guess.
Yes. Well, when we were in Poston, he did marry before he went overseas. He came to visit, and it was before he was going to be sent over. And of course, there was no liquor or anything. And I remember him sneaking a couple of bottles in, and I think that the MPs at the gate that kind of closed their eyes on that. And so my father would have this huge party, and all the men, all his friends would come, and they had a great big blowout and having just singing and all that, having a great time.
So you said your brother was married. Was his wife in the camp with you?
No, he was stationed in near Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
and he met her there, and I think he was there maybe about a year, and he married her, and she remained in Chicago. But he got to return before the war ended because she was dying of leukemia.
Oh my goodness.
So he came back, and for some reason by that time they were in Seattle.
Okay, so I remember also you telling me that when the war started and your brother was in the service,
Mm-hmm.
he was thrown in the brig. Is that correct?
Yes. It was not really told, but I just remembered that he was stationed in Fort Ord, California. And so they did get to come home, on weekend leaves or something. And I recall my brother was driving to Fort Ord to pick him up because we were fairly close. He had either one stripe or two stripes, but they were removed. And I kind of heard them talking about him, that they were put into the brig, I think just at the start of the war, to make sure that they were loyal.
So how long was he there?
I don't think he was in the brig very long, just that when he got out, he did not have any of his stripes.
Back to Poston, you also told me that you were a teenager, so you kind of had a teenager kind of time. Is that correct?
There's a lot of boys.
There were a lot of boys.
But they were pretty shy. But we had the life of what everybody else probably had. We didn't have that. That was a period of time when Sears and Roebuck and Montgomery Ward's made a pile of money, I think, because we had no place to buy anything. So we got to order
Through the catalog.
through the catalog. And then later on, they put in some canteens where you could go and buy
Like a
candy and
like an army canteen.
yeah, just like and we had the same things that the people on the outside had to do. We had shoe ration. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but we had shoe rationing and cigarette. People who smoked, they had little coupons and things. So we still had a life outside that everybody else had. We had laws.
And before I forget, because I remember you telling me this, you told me that you didn't eat an egg until you were 50 something years old. Well, tell that story.
Well, you just walked in the mess hall, and breakfast as always was eggs and mush, oatmeal, uh, and maybe some toast and margarine, I think. Uh, but one day we had boiled eggs, and I happened to peel my boiled egg, and it was all blue inside, and had a little chicken in there, a little chick. And so I just could not eat a boiled egg for many, many, many years. In fact, I couldn't eat eggs for quite a while, but I could not eat any oatmeal mush. I still am a little leery about it, but I will eat oatmeal cookies. But one day, the milk was, of course, powdered milk, like I think everybody on the outside had. And I got to pour the milk on there. And one day I decided to really look what was in my oatmeal. And it was mostly what they call bollweevils.
Oh. It was moving.
No, they were dead because
they'd been boiled.
They were cooked. But I could not, I still don't eat oatmeal.
And then didn't you tell me that the food for the camps came from other camps?
Some of them, yeah. Later on, some camps had raised vegetables. I think Tule Lake had vegetables. And I recall our camp had cantaloupes. And then when I visited Wyoming, I noticed that they raised pigs there and eggs, chickens, and things like that.
And the food was rotated between the camps?
I am assuming that because they could not sell any of that what was grown in the camps. So our meat was I met a meat person in Minden, Fred Danberg, who had a contract, a military contract. And when we went to Minden, he told us that he had a contract, and he said the best meat, all we got basically was mutton in lime green gravy, and mostly innards. We had kidneys and heart, and the liver wasn't bad because we used to eat occasionally. And it was all put in gravy and very deliciously too. And one day I decided to look what was on the gravy. It was a tongue. So to this day, I cannot eat a tongue because it just was something that I was not used to.
Oh my goodness. So all of a sudden then you get news that you're going to be able to go home, back to Gilroy. And can you tell us a little bit about that, transitioning back?
Well, coming back, my brother was able to go back home to get his car. So he and by that time he had a child, and so they loaded the car up and drove back. My parents and my sister and I, we had to come back by bus. So we were this time we were on an air-conditioned bus, and so we stopped in Stockton, California for a break. And that was the first time that I had encountered somebody who did not like us, and they were there by the bus, and they spit at us at the bus, and I recall that they called us names, which I hadn't encountered at the beginning of the war. So anyway, when we got back, someone had been renting our house because there was a man who took over my brother's farm. So when we moved up there, my brother had won one of those pink, really cute little lamps at the carnival. In those days, they had real great carnival gifts. So when we drove up, I saw this pink lamp just sitting on top of the porch, and the people who had moved in there took that little lamp. They, well, they had, what we did was we had a large house, and we had a big storeroom, and we put all our stuff in there, refrigerators and beds and all that. Well, when we got in the house, of course, a lot of that stuff was put out. The refrigerator was out, but the stove was still the same because we had one of those old-fashioned wood stoves that had oven, and I think all the older people remember those. So then I had to go to register to go to school, and I had to walk, probably about a quarter of a mile to the bus stop. And I guess it was a kind of a fearful day. I didn't know what to expect, and but there was Jack, the same bus driver that was there when I left. He greeted me, and he was happy to see me. So got on the bus, and I thought, well, I'm going to see some of my old friends. Well, they were, hi, how you doing? It's almost like, I hadn't left. When I got to the school grounds, there was a gal, I can't remember her last name, but her name was Beverly. She was there to greet our bus, and to greet us that she was happy to come back. And later I found out that her brother was killed in Saipan. But she was the first one there to really greet us to come back. And I'll never forget Beverly.
So once you got home, then there wasn't any anti-Japanese sentiment?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of the stores would not wait on you, and big signs everywhere. Japs not allowed, and farmlands where the Japanese people had farmed had signs that we weren't welcome.
But the school was a safe place.
Yes, I thought for me it was people who didn't want to talk to you didn't talk to you, and that was okay.
So you graduated from high school there?
Yes.
And then
I went to San Francisco, and I went to cosmetology school.
That's why your hair looks so nice.
That's where I met my husband. So, yes.
And he had been in...
His family was in Tamparan, and then from there they were sent to Topaz, Utah. And so they left fairly early. They went to Cleveland.
Oh, Ohio.
Ohio, and my mother-in-law, of course, was never in snow or anything like that. And so the story was she was going to a grocery store, and one day the railroad tracks were covered with ice, and she fell. She made the splits on there and I guess.
Oh my goodness.
And so that was her memory of Cleveland.
So you lived in San Francisco after you were married,
Mm-hmm.
And then you just decided to move to Nevada?
There was a person in my father-in-law's apartment that knew how to do laundry. And so Minden had a laundry for sale. So he asked us if we wanted to come. So we said, sure.
Because you were probably the only Japanese family in Minden?
No. The Japanese people in Minden or Gardnerville did not go to camp.
Oh.
I think it was just the West Coast. Those of us who were close enough
to the ocean
to sabotage or do anything like that.
Because I know you gave me some papers to look through, and I noticed that at the beginning of the war, actually Germans and Italians were also relocated,
Yes.
but not to camps.
No, they decided not to. And we heard after we moved to Minden that there was a lot of FBI agents there. It was just some talk that they told us.
FBI agents in Minden?
Mm-hmm. That's what they said. So I'm not positive on that, but because I guess Minden had a lot of German ancestries.
Oh yeah, they did. They did. And I remember reading also about, they took the Italians out, but then they didn't have any labor for the fishing boats. And so I read in your papers that they let the Italians go back to fishing, but they had to have 50% of the crew had to been quote unquote Americans, which was interesting. But they didn't let the Japanese people go back on the fishing boats. No. When you came to Carson, you didn't have children, correct? Or
yes.
Were your children born before you came to Carson?
Yes, they were born in
And you had 3 children?
Uh-huh. Yes,
Sons?
And our oldest was attending medical school when he was killed in an automobile accident.
Oh,
and he was going to Creighton Medical School.
In Nebraska?
Uh-huh.
So now you just have the 2 left?
2.
And one lives in
Seattle, Washington, and the other is in Peachtree City, Georgia.
Oh my goodness.
And Jerry just had to retire from the Delta Airlines because he was 65.
Was he a pilot?
Yes, he's a commercial pilot. He was in the Marine Corps and was flying in the Marine Corps.
Okay, you mentioned Jerry was a pilot.
Mm-hmm.
What were your other sons' names?
Our firstborn was named Gary.
Gary.
Mm-hmm. And he was 24 when he died. Jeffrey is a respiratory therapist at Virginia Mason in Seattle, Washington.
Well, I think you did well with your children.
Yes.
Yes. And do you have grandchildren?
We have, Jerry has 2 children, and he has, a son has 2 children. And
so he's a great-grandfather?
He's a grandfather.
Grandfather.
Yeah. And Jeffrey has 2 daughters, and one lives in Wisconsin and has triplets.
Oh my goodness. So you go visit?
No, we have not recently. It's a little hectic getting on airplanes.
Oh, it's terrible. It's terrible. So, during the years that you lived in Carson, what kind of things did you do besides working? I know you worked for the personnel department, but...
Yes. When we moved to Carson, my husband is already working at the highway department. I believe his salary is like something like $275 a month. And we lived quite well. So when we moved here, I went to work at the Western Union, which I don't know does it still exist.
I don't know. I remember where it used to be,
yes.
But
yes. So I went there, and then from there, as I worked there, I met a writer named Shipler.
Guy Shipler?
Uh-huh. And so I used to send his messages, his books, and his writings. He would come in the evening, and so I got to know him. I got to know his writings. And then from there, I moved on into state personnel, and I worked there 20 years until my children were educated, and I said I was leaving, and I left.
And you left, and then?
And then I took up the hobbies that I loved. I learned to, started out with porcelain dolls, and I took art lessons from Tina Mund, and we traveled. My husband and I traveled, and we went a lot of places. Went even up into Alaska, and I did crafts. And I did.
So you said you made dolls.
Yes.
Can you kind of describe what
first
dolls?
Got started with porcelain dolls, and I went out to Washoe Valley, and she taught us how to she had the mold and she made the doll, and then we had to clean it and do all that. And then eventually I moved on to Japanese dolls, and I read a book about a woman that had given lessons in Florida. So we went to Florida, and I studied under her for about 3 or 4 days. And the dolls were called Kimikomi dolls, and they were formed by shavings from wood, and then you had to clean it and fix it up, and then you would put the Japanese fabrics into it. The one thing good about it was the head was already done. You just had to put it in there.
And you sold those dolls, is that correct?
I did not sell the Kimikoi dolls, no.
Oh.
I sold dolls that I made, like rag dolls and little doll Christmas ornaments.
Christmas ornaments. Going back to the dolls, and you said you made
Kimikomi, K-I-M-I-K-O-M-A, I think.
Kimikoa.
Kimikoma.
Kimikoma. What?
Kimikome.
Kimikoma. Well, that is a mouthful. So you don't do dolls anymore.
No, I don't.
And you don't do crafts.
If I want to make someone something special, I do.
You do that?
Mm-hmm.
And you live with your husband, you've been married to for?
We will be married 69 years next week.
And your husband's name is?
The nickname is Sam.
Sam.
His Japanese name is Saburo, meaning third son.
Oh.
And actually, he was conceived in Fallon,
Nevada.
His parents had come to Fallon from Colorado when there was the Depression, and they moved to Fallon, Nevada, and were farmers there. And then they moved to San Francisco, and my mother-in-law was pregnant with my husband at that time. And they went over Kingsbury Pass, and you remember, I don't know if you recall, but it was pretty scary.
Yes, it was scary.
So they had one of those old Ford cars, and as they were going up, they met another car. And so my mother-in-law said, "Just stop, I'll just walk the rest of the way."
We used to take people from back east up that road just to scare them. But so if he was born in Fallon, how did he get to?
No, he was conceived
in Fallon, and then
he was born in San Francisco.
So that's how they got to the camp they were living in San Francisco, and
yes.
So that's how they got to the camp in Utah.
Uh-huh.
So my mind is kind of going back and forth here, but you said something earlier about the bomb dropping in Hiroshima, but you said your father was from Hiroshima.
My mother too.
And your mother.
Uh-huh.
So when that happened, that must have generated.
We had a grandmother. My father's mother was still alive. Of course, we didn't get any kind of news for a long time. But we found out, when the mail started going back and forth, we found out that she had survived the bomb. She lived on the outskirts of Hiroshima. And most of our relatives, my father's side, did survive. And they were okay.
So did your dad ever see his mother again?
No.
No.
She passed away soon after. Mm-hmm. But my sister went to travel to Japan and visited them, and evidently my father owned quite a bit of land there, or his family did. So he turned it over to the family and gave it to them.
What are your thoughts about maybe what you've done in your life, or how you feel about your life, or how would you like to be remembered? Or
well, I haven't given it too much thought. It's just that I would like to live just like everybody else, be healthy, and my family could be healthy, and keep my husband going along. And the most important thing was my family, and I think that my husband and I have done well in raising our children, and I guess that's our greatest asset.
So you have granddaughters.
Mhm.
What advice would you give those granddaughters about starting out in the world?
One of the things that I think is really important is to respect your elders and think kindly of them, and can think kindly of people who are less fortunate than you are, and not to take life granted.
Well, Florence, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really quite an honor, and I wished I would have known all this when I first met you in 1960, but truly I had no clue.
I think that a lot of people are not aware of it. Um, they just figure that we just existed like everybody else.
I think so. Thank you.
You're welcome.